please. I want to introduce Bill Draves. When I first started putting emails out and inviting you all to come here, Bill contacted me and said, you know, I'd be willing to pay you money to come and talk in front of this group. And wow, you know, and I have no idea. Yes, I did have to bring that up. I was just very thankful that he had something to share with us about the history of the beginnings of the house. So I don't know what he's brought, but I'm very interested to see it. And before I turn over this to Bill, I want to say, before when I was speaking, I was remiss in missing some people that I needed to thank. One of the people I want to thank is my lovely wife, Lori, over there. Who has been my rock and has been bored to tears with me talking about all this party planning. Yes, she'll be glad it's over. There's also been some wonderful people downstairs that have been taking care of the food and drink so that we could have a good time. And their names are Mary and Marty and Maya Lee. And so I want to recognize them because I really, Greg.
Let's also thank Ambrosia.
They have been very gracious and willing and accommodating to host this event. I think they were a bit uncertain at first when I came with this idea, but
and I don't blame them.
But somehow I came to enough house meetings that they thought that, well, maybe I'm serious after all. And I also, some of you who came early, Greg, Peter, Hugh, Mark, I'm blanking. Jackie. Let's all thank Jackie anyway.
Karen, yes,
we did thank Karen, but thank you. Anyway, for those of you who have contributed to making this what it is, really appreciate it. It's been fantastic. So now,
Stuart!
Yes!
Thank you!
One more time for the camera. Stuart Seaborn, thank you.
Take it away, Bill.
Together. Yeah. You know, when most people tell a story, people are interested in how it ended. And in this case, we're interested in how it started. And to summarize, the start went very well, and you should be proud of the people who started our co-op, and also for all of you who made it possible. I want to add 2 more thank yous. One, to you for being here tonight at the 50th anniversary. Without you, it wouldn't have been happening. And everyone I talked to about that first year was thrilled that you are here and this is happening. And then lastly, I want to thank all of you at home who lived in your co-op here over the last 50 years because you all shared equally in its success and longevity. There's a couple other people here from the first year. Lisa Patterson, Dave Dinkle, Damian O'Brien, Peter Leonard, Pat Donnelly, Ward Paxton, and Mark Saunders.
Stand up, hold up your hands.
They are also serving as the fact checkers after I do my little 20-minute presentation, because everyone I interviewed had some emotion and some feeling for this place. But there is this saying, if you remember the 60s, you weren't really there. So that's my excuse. So it started in early 1969, and Max Kummerow, who was head of the Madison Community Co-op at the time, it was called the Madison Association of Student Co-ops, changed its name, I'm told, in 1971. But he was at International House, another co-op here, and he met with J. Jacob Wind, Phil Davis, and maybe somebody else to plan this co-op. There was a co-op movement in America at that time, and Madison was one of the places where it was really strong. The movement came from a variety of places. For the 60s, it was about an alternative democracy in society. But it also came out of the 1930s. And in the 1930s, apparently there was a co-op movement in the United States. Yes, it came out of the Depression and the need to get together, but also that word community. And that thread of that word community keeps popping up in all my conversations and looking at what went on in that first year or two here. Being a student here, I can tell you that the 1930s were a theme on campus. I mean, you heard people who were alive in the 1930s. You had the alternatives, the FDR New Deal. You even saw it in the movies. On Saturday nights, some kids would rent an auditorium on campus, a lecture hall, and play Marx Brothers movies from the 1930s. And so that 30s was a period of where people were taking their cue in the 1960s. There was also a professor named Graskamp, and J. Jacob Wind and Max Kummerow would almost literally sit at his feet about co-ops. Now, Graskamp, I'm told, didn't believe in co-ops, but he was a business professor, and he knew real estate and mortgages and the nitty-gritty, and he readily shared that with Max and J. Jacob. And so they got together at International House, decided to rent this building. The first name that Max Kummerow provided was Mendota Co-op, and that had implications for a Mendota mental health facility across the lake. And they didn't call it a mental health facility in those days. And so that one was quickly dropped, and the name Stone Manor was proposed, probably by Phil Davis. And then we were off and running. An address and a phone number. To the best of my recollection, that phone number was the pay phone booth that was located right there, that served both incoming and outgoing calls for between 46 and 52 people who lived here at one time in the first couple of years. The financial troubles began immediately. almost shut down before we even got here. And so desperate letters were sent out to me and the other first-year people from George Ferens, the treasurer of the co-op, pleading with rent payments by July 7th, when $4,000 payment needed to be paid. Rent was $50 a month, but that was absolutely critical, and apparently we coughed up the money because the co-op began. And from the very beginning, this place was on the doorstep of history. And as soon as we walked in the door, everyone, of course, had heard about Woodstock, which had just taken place a couple of weeks earlier. Tracy Miller, one of the first-year residents, was actually at Woodstock. And then there was this guy, I think it was Maury, who worked at Woodstock. And he had an ID card, and we gathered around to stare at this enormously significant piece of paper and to be in awe of anybody who had come from Woodstock. And so it began a little bit haphazardly. When you talk to people who lived there that first year, the word chaotic, everybody brought that word as kind of a theme. Now I'm going to have to explain it. It wasn't destructive in any way, but it manifested itself in a lot of ways for a group of people who were 18 to 22. I think the oldest was around that age, starting this thing. And so room assignments, Mara Cherkasky told me, were either by lot or by squatters' rights. One of the women I remember interviewing put her stuff in one of the rooms, came back, and it was thrown out into the corridor. A clear message she had not chosen the correct room in the co-op. And then there were the house meetings. Mara actually went upstairs to the filing cabinets and went through all of the minutes from the first 2 years. They are still cat-stained after 50 years, so I personally have not. I am relying on the secondary resource of Mara and her excerpts from the house meetings.
My cat lived here. She was membership.
She was a member, yes.
She was officially membership.
Was she spring?
Yes.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm so sorry.
To intersect there with the cat comment, there were two things that came up almost every house meeting. We had house meetings every other Sunday night at 9 p.m. Ward Paxton was the first president. J. Jacob Wynn was the house manager. And I think we all respected his leadership throughout the experience. But the two things
Did you ever find
that
his clothes?
I don't know that one. We'll save that one. The two things that were never resolved were cats and crashers. We were never able to quite do. But from the beginning, the minutes also convey the atmosphere and how people felt and what it felt like to be here at that time. And so just to read the first one here. Jacob began the meeting by asking George, the treasurer, to define what a co-op is. But since George wasn't particularly excited about that, Jay then went into the three things that define the co-op. The one that has lasted 50 years, to offer a chance to establish a meaningful sense of community and togetherness. My sense here is that continued for 50 years. Hillary said that new contracts would be ready by Tuesday because the contracts we signed, we didn't sign. The original contracts had no place for the tenant to sign. And it was a shock to some of us that there were property taxes in Madison that applied to us as well. And so the co-op started, and it was kind of a neutral place. You could call it a hippie co-op that probably would encompass things, but it wasn't, as a house, leaning in any one direction. There were political people who lived in the house, but the house itself was not political. There was a motion in the October 11th House meeting on the house itself was not political. Let me explain.
The building, the people announced, we ran someone for the 8th district board, city council, we got her elected. There she is. I'm Mark Potts. I live here 1978, 80, 81, that's for exactly, in Miami. And I'm just doing what I did at the house meetings. Okay?
This is kind of like how a house meeting went. So in 1969, for instance, Phil Davis had a motion that the House support the October 15th moratorium. Not quite sure what the moratorium was. It's there in the history books. The motion passed 13-5 with 6 abstentions. So you can see, as a house, people were all over the place. There were people here who purely came to study at UW. They went to class, they came back, they studied, that's it. There were vegetarians here, but this was not a vegetarian co-op. There were environmentalists here, but that was not
dancers, you gotta add dancers. I'm sorry, I'm just offending. You gotta add dancers. There were people here that were in the UW dance department. Red Colbert. Seriously, it was like a part of the whole
I'm only going to do 20 minutes and then you can talk. And I'm just talking about 69 to 71. So there were atheists here, there were religious people here, there were people into Tai Chi and yoga, but it wasn't a Tai Chi yoga co-op. There were a number of people into soft drugs, marijuana, clearly not hard drugs. Jacob told me that he came down one night at 2 in the morning to make a sandwich, and there were a couple of crashers down there, and there was a pile of white stuff and maybe a candle, and he swept the white stuff off the table, told the crashers to leave and never come back. And lastly, it was not a free love co-op. It was for some people. There was, in this room, a number of us gathered around the TV every night at 5:30 to watch Walter Cronkite. There was a lot of alternative media at that point, and we all subscribed to that, the Great Speckled Bird, the Cardinal, the official student newspaper, was very student-oriented. But at that time, unlike today, we all gathered to hear Walter say, and that's the way it was. And we believed that. The room over there, that's now a play area, was called the Che Guevara room. Nobody can remember how it got its name. And then there was the university. So at this point in history of the university, there was this thing called in loco parentis, which meant that the university assumed the role of parent once you came here. You know, rightly or wrongly, people felt that 18, 19-year-olds were not fully adult, and all colleges and universities assumed that role. So the house had to be approved by the university in order to be student housing. And everybody in the house was a student, except for one person that I know of, Jeff Haynes, who drove a taxi. Before we moved in, this was a sorority, but we needed to have the different sexes on different floors. So there was lots of corridors and hidden little alleyways around here, around the bathroom, so that the sexes could be separated here. Now, from pretty much the beginning, that became a fuzzy line, but nevertheless, that's what the university wanted. And then, for a period that lasted maybe 3 years, the university would do periodic inspections of the house to have it be approved. And Ward remembers that one time the house was not approved, in part, not in full, but in part, because we had drug paraphernalia on the Christmas tree. The next time it was approved, in part because the grade point average, GPA, of the people living in your co-op was higher than the people living in the fraternities and sororities. The juxtaposition of his comments, really, I love that. And so university people would show up in suits and ties and had a problem with the officers not being very cooperative. Ward suggested that maybe it was our style rather than a conscious effort to be impudent. Adjournment was welcome. Now, as I said, we were on the doorstep of history, and nobody whom I've interviewed can totally separate their experience of living here from the experience of stepping just outside onto the porch, much less up to Bascom Hill. And so when people say it was chaotic, that external environment was so chaotic that it was impossible for any of us to have a memory of this place as not being on the doorstep of history. And so almost every movement that I think we can think of today did go on in 1969. There was the feminist movement, there was the gay and lesbian movement, the environmental movement, the black student movement, the TA or teacher's assistant strike and movement, and of course there was the anti-war movement. So when Arlene Levinson said the first year it wasn't fun, but it was wondrous, she doesn't mean that we didn't have fun. We had fun, there were fun times, but in our minds, when you take that whole experience together, it was wondrous going on. Now this one is not a picture from Madison, but to me, this is what it felt like going to the university when I was living here. I remember walking past the National Guard with their helmets, their shields, and something in their hands to get to class. I remember the helicopter flying over the building. I remember the tear gas falling on our porch and running to the basement, not knowing what would be happening next. And so that external environment, the university, where we were going to school, I remember not debating with myself whether to go to class or whether to go out on the streets, a protest, a festival, a concert, whatever, because they were both so amazing. And so people here did participate in all of those things. The chief of the fire department was pro-student. And so there was a chant, firefighters fight fires, not people, yay firemen. The police chief was not particularly happy with what we were doing here or anywhere on campus. And so the chant of the students, usually after you'd been arrested or hit, but it could be any time, was, "The policeman is my friend. He helps me cross the street. The policeman is my friend. He helps me cross the street." And so it is impossible to separate your co-op, our co-op, from what was happening in the external environment, our dorm. And that's why I say we were on the doorstep of history, because you could see it just looking out the window. And then, back inside the co-op, we had to figure things out. The Madison Community Co-op was very helpful, but we had to figure things out. And so we had to figure out taking care of the place and keeping it clean. And let me speak on behalf of all of the people in the first 2 years. We have never seen this place as clean and beautiful as it is today. So just to quickly read through the minutes from February 1st, Terry has ingeniously worked out a new model, groveling over time units, human capacities, mobilization techniques, flight plans, and computer programmers, producing this master plan for getting the house clean and the dishes reasonably so. Each person in the house will do 2 kitchen jobs, and in addition, work crews will be formed to clean the house from top to bottom, in parentheses, the bottom is really bad, every Saturday. Chaos then descended and the meeting was adjourned. I mentioned that co-ops were a thing, and Jay Jacob was a prominent member of the co-op movement and encouraged people to start co-ops. And in my conversation with him 2 weeks ago, he remembers the price for every building that either became a co-op or was lost, like 222 Lake Lawn, because the not landlord, but the guy who bought the building bid just a few $1,000s more. And so there was this feeling of a movement. And at that time, the Milwaukee Journal, now the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, was the leading newspaper in the state. We didn't have online news at that point. And this story made the front page of the Milwaukee Journal on Sunday, which was even more interesting and highlighting what was going on. And then Jay told me this story that I'll try to make quickly, is that one of the girls in this picture, I don't know which one, was underage at the time and was a runaway from the Mendota girls' place from across the lake, living as a crasher, as several people did. But she was in the photo and the police identified her and they came and took her away. The story had a happy ending in that she got placed in a foster home with parents, foster parents, and thrived there. And the year after or two, Jay Jacob and his friend was invited over to dinner, and the girl fell in love with Jay Jacob's friend and eventually married him when she became of age. And then there was the whole thing about buying the house. And so there were a couple people involved in buying the house. One of them has just joined us, Ed Korn. And to my recollection, Ed, his father, owned some real estate in New York and led the way, along with Ward and Jay, to form a committee to work on buying the house. Again, a quick reading of the minutes. Ed, our financial father, suggested again that we look into purchasing the place. Another Stone Manor verbal brawl erupted, with some of the factions pleading that the house was too big, the land and area too expensive, the old is too house. And then Ward gave a little lecture on co-ops in the 1930s. Ward, Ed, and Jay decided to form a three-man committee to work on buying the house. Among other things, Steve Kalin, owner of the slum, will be invited to dinner. Various underground tactics, such as blowing out the lighting system, having the furnace explode, and other techniques were discussed to impress Mr. Kalin. Parentheses, note, Mr. Kalin is not to read these minutes. And so thereafter was the effort to buy the house. Again, from the minutes of February 18th, George reported that Max Cumero had done something with a computer and come up with the information that it is impossible to buy this house. That, of course, did not happen. We, all of us bought the house and with no money down. And thanks to the leaders for doing that. Close to being finished here, and then we can have rebuttals. So this was the team that first year. And again, one story stands out to me, and that was the fraternity across the street, which then the following year became Marvin Gardens Co-op. It didn't make it, but a number of us gave it the college try. But before the fraternity closed, they were having a party, and the stripper had gotten sick and so could not appear. So 2 guys came over here and asked if any of the women in our co-op would dance naked on this very large dining table. Every one of the women demurred very quickly and declined the offer. But one woman said, yeah, I kind of want to do that. And therefore commenced a spontaneous house meeting on the steps with these 2 fraternity guys saying, come on, let's make a decision here. And everybody getting in on a mass discussion. I assume 3 things. I assume one was sexploitation. I assume another one was a woman's right to choose. And I know pretty much for a fact that there were a lot of irrelevant issues that got brought into the 2 things that strike me about that event. Number 1, that we took care of people and saw each other more as brothers and sisters than anything else. And it was a genuine caring for her and her well-being that brought about the discussion. The other thing that impresses me to this day is that this was a group decision? Really? Phil Davis, in talking with him last week, said everybody's business was everybody's business. But to this day, she would have accepted whatever the group had decided, and that together those things equal community, as an example, an illustration of it. What the result was is that the house voted that she could go across the street and dance, but that the house would select 2 guys to go with her. They selected the wimpiest guys in the co-op. One was a poet, photographer, Phil Davis, and the other was me. I don't know what they expected would happen or not happen, but anyway, it ended like that. And so the beginning started out really well. And from the get-go, there were skeptics, mainly from outside the house, but some inside, that co-ops would not make it. I submitted a paper in my senior year, and the teaching assistant, the professor, was Joe, and then his wife, Joanne Elder, who have had celebrations of their career in sociology. But it was the TA who said, I think you are overly optimistic about the possibilities of, insert hippie, counterculture, serving as a basis of social support for societal innovation. And 50 years later, I would like to write my comment to the TA and saying, I think everybody here for the last 50 years has done a pretty good job of instilling community in our community, our co-op, and then for us who left here and went out, we did not do, by and large, the big corporate, multinational corporation that everyone said we would go to. And when I talked to other people, yes, J. Jacob Wynn became a consultant, but an environmental consultant. Another one became a chiropractor, a veterinarian. One worked for the Associated Press, Arlene Levinson. Another in education, but alternative education. And so, just to end, I want to thank you all and everyone who ever lived in Ambrosia, Martha's, thank you, and Stone Manor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for the privilege.
I want to take a moment to thank Dan Steffen over here, our photographer and videographer here. He's a personal friend. He's an awesome photographer. And I wanted somebody to be here to capture oral history and capture this event. So thanks, Dan. If some people have some short stories that they would like to tell, oh, here they come. Yes.
This is from my friend Sally Sticks, who was a stone mannerism. And she said, speak loudly. My friend Sally Sticks was a stone mannerism, and she was a climbing attorney in Madison. She was retired. She's in Colorado. And she wanted to know if you discussed Jay Wynn presiding naked over the early house meeting.
Take your time, Bill.
I don't think he taught it.
No, I missed that. What was that? What was the question?
You want to reiterate the question?
Did you discuss very early meetings with Jay Wynn presiding naked over the house meetings?
Wow. Raising that one, Sally. That's one of those where you blank. He did tell some stories about, yeah, some spontaneous dancing and things that...
This is a house meeting.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else here? Remember that one?
I think it was okay to leave that out, Bill.
Okay. Didn't make the minutes.
Very disappointing.
But thank you, Sally.
So I want to say a few things, and I hope a lot of people will say a few things. When I lived here, my experience was 1978 to 81. Okay? And I was involved in the governance, you know, the MCC, Martha's, all that. But my experience was political, it was intellectual, and it was sexual. Okay? I was 22 years old. I moved from Texas. Okay? I had hardly ever been out with a woman, and had never been involved in politics. Okay, I came here, and I was anti-establishment. I had good grades in high school. I dropped out. I was like, I'm not going to do that anything. I came here, and it was the first time in my formative years that my mind was stimulated, and I threw myself into the whole. I was fascinated with the collective co-op experience. People in this house at that time, we decided we wanted to run someone for city council. We decided that we were going to meet and figure out which one of us was going to run for city council. Okay? We were going to draft a candidate. And fortunately, Iris took and I have a campaign to prove it. I do.
I said okay, but I was like, what is this? What does it mean to run for office? And I figured, you all would help me to figure it out.
And we did.
We did, yes.
Yeah, I have a newsletter in here that's to the 8th District people. We wrote, it's all these zoning issues and different neighborhood issues and community issues we researched extensively. I didn't have a job, so I had a lot of time, right? But I just moved from Texas. It's before I started working at LATC. And we wrote this incredibly researched and in-depth. And we were like, you had a team of people. You had a team of people. And no one thought, these people that live in this house are going to elect someone to city council? Yeah, right.
Well, we were running against Leon Vargas. So then he put up his structure out on the lake. And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to lose now because that Statue of Liberty structure's up. And the flamingos.
Right. We're running against the creative artists.
Right. And so how could we compete with that?
But that was a primary. Right.
Yeah. So then we just stuck to the message. And
we stuck to the message on the day when we were serious on neighborhood issues, and this is serious stuff. Now, at the same time, we're having fun too, okay? At the same time, we're eating good food, we're playing a lot of music, and my friend Howard Capon, who lived here, I have a letter that he wrote to the house right before he moved out, saying farewell, but he was going to move out to another country co-op, and he never made it there because he died in a car accident. I have this letter, a really good friend, and he talks about how living here changed his life. He was the same age as me at that time, okay? Came came here, awkward, not very confident, came here, grew into himself, talks about, you know, I could actually be friends with women. I didn't know that was possible, you know, in a non-sexual way. Okay. So it was all this growth for a lot of people. And I carry up, and the kids, playing the music. Shawnee, you were like 3 years old, right? Do you want to say something about your experience? I mean, because, you know, it's like, what was it like? Everyone here, I think, experienced it differently. But it was all about relationships. It was all about caring. And through that caring, those relationships, we were going to kick ass and do a bunch of good things. And that's what we did. Okay? So, I don't know. What was it like?
Yeah, just being a young child, I think it was just a magical place. And community is the word that has come out to me. You know, my family was divorcing at the time, and my dad and I sit here together. And I think it provided a very supportive place for me, and a place where my imagination was free, and I was fortunate.
Thank you for that. Yeah. There was a lot of creativity. I moved here and I wrote my parents. I found an old letter where I said, you know, I moved in this place, it's amazing. There are a lot of talented and creative people. And a few crazy people too. You know? But it was like part of what made life rich, you know, and we were doing good stuff. So for me it was very political because I became radicalized in terms of gender relations, democratic management, lots of things. It was huge at that point in my life, and that stuff has affected me throughout my life and my career. It's oriented me to certain values. But it was all came down not just to the ideology, but it was the relationships we formed. We liked each other, we hung out with each other.
I was wondering how many people actually met their future spouse here, because Greg and I met here, and then we got married actually here. And we had all left here. How many people did that, or met their future?
Yeah, there's such a hand up.
How many people met your partner here? Can I see that again?
Our proposal.
The proposal was here.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I think it was when we reenacted the Grease movie here. You know, I came down the stairs dressed like Olivia Newton. I think that changed everything. We went from being hippies to being greasers. Greasers. Oh, it was so fun. We played the music, did the whole Grease thing.
I mean, there was some free love going on. You gotta say.
Well, I moved here. My name is Patricia Hamill. I moved here in 1976 because my boyfriend at the time, Michael Kaufman, who was Stone Manor, one of the holdovers, worked with him on Free For All, which is a free, radical, independent publication. Phil Davis worked on it, Ken Perlow, some other people who totally. And some of the things I remember is learning how to take care of a building and take care of things, learning how to tuck point and make terraces. People were hauling buckets of dirt and broken up concrete the city gave us to terrace down here. And, you know, remodeling the phone room up on the 4th floor, and I painted some murals in a couple rooms. I met a bunch of people. We had an organic farming collective that was based here. George and Rickville, Ricardo Yankee was here, and a group of other people grew organic sweet corn out in Middleton, sold it at the farmer's market. And a number of those people went on to start organic CSAs, organic farms around the state in later years. And some of us went and started a co-op on Mary Street called Red Pine Co-op, which is no longer a co-op. But we didn't have maintenance people then. It was us doing the maintenance on the building, up on the 4th floor on a scaffold, tuck pointing the building. And you know, I'll never forget learning all the things that I learned here. All the horrible house meetings, consensus decision making, and sharing the responsibility for making food and cleaning up, and you know, all the house jobs that people had. It was just an incredible experience. Even I was only here for 2 years, but it was very important. The law firm I work for now is the co-op law firm. Represents all the Madison housing co-ops and food co-ops and stuff. So I've read a lot about all the history of all these houses, and I know a lot about the history of all these houses from since then. But it's incredible that this is survived. I mean, when you know, when they bought this house, people didn't want to live in sororities, partly because the anti-war movement and the property values were down. And then the sororities and fraternities tried to buy back some of these houses. And when sororities and fraternities rebounded, they were like, well, you know, these are nice buildings. We'd like to have them back. We'd like to, and that didn't happen. I mean, it happened with a couple like Manor, but and LAGC did not survive. And I knew a number of people that weren't there. That visual came out of this house and Toad Lane, I think.
So was the Sprout Co-op here?
The Sprout Co-op was here. Farber, Dean Rekachak.
Shawnee Cups? I mean, we had a business, Shawnee Cups, named after Shawnee over here.
Oh wow.
Yep.
Okay.
I started Sprout Co-op. I went to the farmers market. Sprout Co-op.
Underground anarchist feminist collective dating from the early
Who's got the
70s.
midnight shift?
Okay, so the Sprout, you know how I got into the Sprout Co-op? I lived here from Texas. And so they got the Sprout Co-op thing going, man, I don't want to contribute. Well, we got all the renting scheduled. And like, I became the delivery guy that would take the Sprouts to the restaurants and the grocery stores, right? And my main qualification, if not my only qualification, was I had this big ass heavy Rambler station wagon, like 1965. It's like a tank. And you could get up that hill in the snow and ice. And that's how I got the job. Just saying.
Well, I hope people keep sharing their stories as the evening progresses, but I would like to, well, unless somebody has something they really...
Sure, I wanted to say something.
Yes, please do, Brenda.
I moved in when I was 17 years old in 1976. And I left when I was 19 to help colonize Manor, which was going through some hard times. And this is where I grew up. I mean, I went from being a teenager to being a young woman. I came out as a lesbian, and after that I was on the membership committee, and as part of that growing process, we started to ask, you know, prospective members how they felt about LGBT folks. And we did the same thing at Manor. And that was new. That was new then at that time. And I really appreciate Martha's for letting me grow up in that way. But I really want to correct one thing about the telephones. So, there was a payphone. There was a payphone, and it had a number. But there was also, some of us may remember, that there was a telephone that was under the name of Stanley Manor. And the reason it was under the name of Stanley Manor is we did not want to have to pay for a business line. And that went on for many, many years. And we all had to, you know, fess up to our own long-distance phone calls, you know, because we weren't making them from the payphone and all that kind of thing. And then someday, you know, and then we were always behind. And the phone company called one day, and somebody picked up the phone, who maybe wasn't in on the joke, I don't know. And they asked for Stanley Manor. There's nobody who lives here by then. So that was the end of our phone line. So two completely different stories. I just wanted to share both of them.
But it was a welcoming space, and you know, for everyone. It felt like to me, and that helped me. And so I met all kinds of people and had relationships with all kinds of people that I wouldn't have normally. And so like it just expanded my mind, you know. It got me out of my own little world, you know. And that you could collaborate with, not only just know those people and love them, but collaborate and make bigger things happen.
Lesbian was not a word that was used in Darlington, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Wait, he wants to say something. Stuart.
Yes.
So one more thing.
Yeah.
So Rick Still and I met in my room in 1975 on the 4th floor and talked about starting a rural cooperative. And we went through a couple of iterations of this or that. 7 years later, we started the co-op. It's still living today. It's 37 years old. Half of the members are original members, and we're getting a good start in the second generation. We're called Dancing Waters Permaculture Community. We have a website. You can check us out. Come and visit.
Where is it?
Near Days Mills. It's about 2 hours out of town.
And we should, Last thing I would add before we break up is LAGC, Landing Area Grocery Collective, is also a big part of the community retail food co-op. And there are people in this room that work there as staff. And that was part of the other big enterprise, going into the food industry, providing good, healthy food to people in this neighborhood. So there was a lot of energy and there was a lot of good things happening. And I just feel really fortunate that I got to be a part of that. Because it really changed me as a person. Gave me good values.